Have you ever wondered what really happens when someone vanishes without a trace? Sydney West, a 20-year-old woman, was last seen walking along the famous Golden Gate Bridge, surrounded by dense fog. The final moments of her life remain a mystery, and her family is desperately fighting to uncover the truth. How did a seemingly perfect family find themselves caught in a world of uncertainty and despair? Stay with me to uncover the surprising details of this enigmatic case and the theories surrounding Sydney's disappearance. Sydney West was born on July 11, 2001, in the state of California, United States. She was the eldest daughter of Jay and Kimberly West, who had another daughter named Faith. The family spent most of Sydney's life in Pleasanton, California, a city with a population of over 70,000 known for its quality of life. Sydney was described by her family and friends as a cheerful and fun person who loved to make those around her feel good. She was also intelligent and enjoyed a good conversation. From a young age, Sydney had a strong affinity for trees, which sparked her interest in the environment. As she grew older, she even convinced her mother to start composting food scraps that would normally go to waste. At her school, Foothill High School in Pleasanton, Sydney was considered an excellent student who was very dedicated to sports, especially volleyball. In 2017, while still in high school, she moved with her family to Chapel Hill, a city in North Carolina. In Chapel Hill, Sydney attended Carborough High School, where she became co-captain of the volleyball team. After graduating high school, Sydney began playing beach volleyball and also ventured into the world of arts. She loved writing, drawing, and painting, but her greatest passion was music. Sydney often went to bars to sing songs she had written herself, and these songs are available online for anyone interested in listening. Sydney graduated from high school in 2019, and afterward, she decided to take an entire year off to step away from her routine and try to find herself. During the same time, she started writing on her personal blog about her anxiety and depression crisis. Later, Sydney traveled to Australia, where she continued playing beach volleyball. Then she went to a yoga retreat in Mexico while her parents contacted a college counselor to help Sydney choose and prepare for the college she wanted to attend. Sydney's parents wanted her to get into one of the top 8 universities in the United States, which are Harvard University, Princeton, Cornell, Brown, Yale, Pennsylvania, Columbia, and Dartmouth. According to sources, Sydney's parents spent over $20,000 on hiring the college counselor and other expenses for Sydney to visit the universities and later apply. A year earlier, Sydney had been rejected by all the universities she applied to despite being an excellent student. As a result, her parents decided to invest a bit more to ensure she could get into one of the universities they desired this time. However, even with this investment, Sydney was unable to gain admission to any of the 8 most prestigious universities in the United States, which left her parents very disappointed. There's even a report that Sydney's father was so upset that he broke his daughter's phone with a hammer. But despite being rejected from all those universities, Sydney managed to get into the University of California, located in Berkeley. Her goal was to stay in Berkeley until she could transfer to another university that she considered better. However, Sydney's parents did not want that and felt it would be better for her to stay in North Carolina and begin studying at a closer university. This was because the costs would be much lower since Sydney would be studying at a university in the same state where the family was currently residing. Sydney was also expected to do an internship at the company where her father was working at the time, but Sydney was determined to go to Berkeley, going against her parents' wishes. In response, her parents said she could go if she wanted. It was her decision, but they would only pay the amount they would have if she stayed at the University of North Carolina. This amount would be nearly $10,000. Which is a significant sum but trivial compared to the costs at the University of California, which could reach almost $70,000. Sydney then considered taking out a student loan and also created an online store where she began selling some of her belongings to raise money. On July 4, 2020, Independence Day in the United States, the West family traveled to a lakeside house to enjoy the holiday. Everything was going well until Sydney decided to jump into the lake from a boat shed, which resulted in a severe concussion. Sydney underwent treatment for a while until, in August 2020, she went to Berkeley, California, to start her studies at the university. In Berkeley, Sydney participated in a freshman program designed to prepare students for university life. In this program, new students had the opportunity to meet other students, take courses, and get to know the campus better. Sydney had not yet decided what major she would pursue. She had a strong inclination toward medicine but was still uncertain if that was what she truly wanted. Additionally, she also struggled to adapt to university life. She thought it would be one thing, but it turned out to be completely different. Not to mention that in August 2020, the world was experiencing a global health crisis, so the semester began with mass virus testing, quarantines, and more testing to see if anyone was infected. California was one of the states that implemented a strict lockdown policy, so there was no way for Sydney or any other college student to have a normal routine at that time. Students had to remain isolated in their dorms without roommates. Each had their own room. They also could not have visitors and could only interact with the 12 people living in the same dorm building as them. All classes were virtual. Due to the concussion she sustained, Sydney couldn't spend much time in front of a computer screen as it would cause her headaches. This was very challenging for her since all the classes were virtual, as mentioned earlier. Sydney then decided to take a leave of absence from college to fully recover from her concussion and return the following year in 2021. Since Sydney took a leave of absence, she could no longer stay on campus. She didn't want to go back to North Carolina and chose to remain in California. Sydney stayed at her uncle's house for a few days and also stayed at the homes of some friends while she thought about what to do next. On September 29th, Sydney decided to go to San Francisco. There, she checked into the Hilton Hotel in the city's financial district. That afternoon, Sydney spoke with her father for the last time. They talked for almost 2 hours on the phone, and according to her father, they had a good conversation and missed each other very much. Sydney reportedly said during this conversation that she felt she had disappointed herself and her family. Her father insisted that she come home to be closer to the family, but Sydney didn't want to. On the day they spoke on the phone, Jay, Sydney's father, was in San Diego, also in California. He had traveled for work and told Sydney that he would like to meet her the following day. Jay's goal was to try to convince his daughter to come home with him, but that did not happen. Father and daughter arranged to speak on the phone the next day, but after that day, Sydney did not answer her father's calls. The next morning, Jay woke up around 7 a.m. One of the first things he did was grab his phone and check the location of his daughter's phone. However, he couldn't track Sydney's phone. Both Jay and Sydney's mother had access to their daughter's location through her phone tracker. They also had access to all her social media accounts and her bank account. Since he couldn't track his daughter's location, Jay tried calling her several times, but each time, the call went straight to voicemail. With that, Jay decided to call Kim, his wife and Sydney's mother. He asked Kim to check their daughter's social media and emails to see if she could find any information about Sydney's whereabouts. Kim looked through everything but didn't find anything unusual. The only strange thing she noticed was that Sydney had spent a night at a hotel in San Francisco, something the family was unaware of as they thought she was at a friend's house. Kim also saw that their daughter had ordered an Uber very early, around 6:30 a.m., to take her from the hotel to Crissy Field. For those who don't know, Crissy Field is a park, a well-treed area located underneath the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. The location is known as a place where people go to engage in outdoor activities like biking, running, and yoga. Since Sydney's parents found out where she might be, Jay decided to go to the location to try to find his daughter with the help of his brother, who lived in the area. He went to Crissy Field. Jay and his brother searched for Sydney for hours but found nothing. The next day, October 1st, Jay returned to North Carolina, and there, along with his wife, he went to the police and reported their daughter missing. Authorities in North Carolina quickly contacted California authorities to share the report of Sydney West's disappearance. The first step taken by detectives in San Francisco was to interrogate the Uber driver who had taken Sydney to Crissy Field on the morning of September 30th. The driver cooperated with authorities the entire time and was ruled out as a suspect early in the investigation. The doorman at the hotel where Sydney stayed was also questioned by the police. The doorman stated that he had spoken with Sydney while she was waiting for the Uber and also helped her get into the car. He said she seemed to be acting normally. Both the doorman and the Uber driver stated that Sydney was a very friendly and polite young woman who seemed to enjoy talking. A few days after her disappearance, Sydney's backpack was found at Crissy Field. The backpack was hidden behind some bushes as if someone had tried to conceal it there. Initially, the police theorized that someone might have stolen Sydney's backpack and attempted to hide it, but strangely, all of Sydney's belongings were inside the backpack, including high-value items like her laptop. For example, it was as if Sydney herself had intentionally left the backpack hidden there. In addition to the laptop, there were also some drawings made by Sydney, colored pencils, some notebooks, and clothes inside the backpack. The next step for the detectives was to analyze the footage from the security cameras in the area and the Golden Gate Bridge. In the footage, Sydney can be seen walking on the bridge with her backpack on, wearing black leggings, a teal sweatshirt, and dark green and black Vans slip-on shoes. She was wearing prescription glasses, and her long hair was tied up in a bun on top of her head. At one point, while walking on the bridge, Sydney turns around and runs back towards Crissy Field as if she had forgotten something behind. According to the police, it was at this moment that Sydney supposedly hid her backpack near the bushes, because when she reappears in the footage from the security cameras at the location, she is without the backpack, holding only her phone and wearing her headphones. The last image captured of Sydney is from a second security camera on the Golden Gate Bridge. There was a dense fog on the bridge that morning, which made it difficult for her to be filmed by other cameras. After being captured by the second camera on the bridge, Sydney does not appear on any other footage. It's as if Sydney had simply been swallowed by the fog. To assist in the investigation, Sydney's family hired a private detective named Scott Dudek. Scott, along with Jay, Sydney's father, watched the footage recorded by the Golden Gate security cameras for hours. They observed every detail, but after the footage from the second camera, Sydney could no longer be seen. According to the police, there had been no activity on Sydney's bank accounts, social media, or her phone since September 30th. The phone and headphones, the only items she carried with her, disappeared along with her, according to the family. When they lived in California, the Golden Gate Bridge was one of Sydney's favorite places. She loved to run and exercise there, as well as take photos of the scenery. The San Francisco Police Department actively searched for Sydney throughout the city. Her information was entered into the National Crime Information Center database, and the case fell under the jurisdiction of the Missing Persons Unit of the Special Victims Division. The fact that the last location where Sydney was seen was the Golden Gate Bridge, and also that she was only seen entering the bridge and not leaving it, led the police and the public to theorize that perhaps Sydney had taken her own life. However, for the young woman's family, this theory does not make sense. In addition to its beauty and remarkable engineering, the Golden Gate Bridge is also known as one of the locations where many people seek to take their own lives. According to sources, since its opening in 1937, more than 1,800 people have taken their lives at this location. Furthermore, some of Sydney's friends, who wished to remain anonymous, claimed that she had attempted to take her own life on the bridge just a few days before her disappearance. At the bridge, there are some agents who are part of a special security service stationed there to try to prevent people from attempting to take their own lives. These agents were placed there in the early 2000s with the aim of preventing potential attacks on the bridge. However, due to the circumstances, their work has turned into preventing people from attempting to jump from the location. According to reports, one of these agents working on the bridge spotted Sydney there on September 26th with the intention of taking her own life. The agent managed to stop her, and Sydney was taken to a psychiatric hospital, where she was placed under observation for 72 hours. When informed of what had happened, Sydney's parents requested that she be kept in the psychiatric hospital for a longer period. However, California law states that a person cannot be held in a psychiatric ward against their will for more than 72 hours. Sydney could only remain under observation for a longer period if there was a court order for that, which was not the case. Thus, on September 29th, Sydney was released. Sydney did not want to go to her uncle's house or to the home of any of her friends. Instead, she checked into the Hilton Hotel in San Francisco. She was released from the hospital the day before she disappeared. Sometime after her disappearance, Sydney's family created a social media page called Find Sydney West. At this point, some strange things began to happen. Anonymous reports from supposed friends and acquaintances of Sydney started to emerge, claiming that her parents were deleting any comments on the page that theorized that Sydney had taken her own life. According to these reports, the reason Sydney did this was due to some mental health issues she was experiencing and also because she felt very pressured. As I mentioned, her parents absolutely refused to accept the theory that Sydney took her own life. To them, it makes no sense at all. Other reports claimed that Jay and Kim deleted posts from their daughter's social media that hinted at her feeling frustrated and depressed. On a blog that Sydney maintained, where she used to post her written poems, many of those poems were also deleted. Another strange fact is that Sydney kept a prepaid phone hidden from her parents. This phone was found inside her backpack, which was hidden in some bushes at Crissy Field. It is said that Sydney would take the SIM card from the phone she normally used, which her parents knew about, and place it in the prepaid phone. There are also reports that Sydney would leave her official phone in her dorm connected to Wi-Fi when she went out. This way, when her parents tracked her, they would think she was in her dorm, when in fact she was elsewhere. She also had a Reddit account, and her parents didn't even know what Reddit was until recently. Furthermore, Sydney had private Instagram accounts, so unlike her official account, her parents did not have access to these other accounts. Sydney was not friends with her mother on Facebook and even changed her password for a time so that Kim would stop spying on her. There are reports stating that when Sydney was a teenager, her father kicked her out of the house a few times because she had received low grades at school. Several friends had to host Sydney for 1 or 2 nights because of this. The family denies the validity of all these reports and also denies that a prepaid phone was found inside Sydney's backpack. To the authorities, the most likely hypothesis is that Sydney took her own life and that her body was never found. As you already know, the family disagrees with this. The Golden Gate Bridge is the location with the most cases of people taking their own lives in the world. This reality has generated a movement to save lives by reducing access to the bridge. This movement is led by parents of individuals who have taken their lives at the site, with the help of authorities. The movement proposed a solution to prevent people from jumping off the bridge, aiming to stop them from falling into the water. The solution transformed into an idea: a stainless steel net, 6 meters below the bridge and extending 6 meters outward, which is currently under construction. The construction of the net began in 2018, but has faced numerous delays, rising costs, and opposition from local residents, who argued that the aesthetics and high cost of the net were unfeasible and that it should not be built. Ken Holmes worked for 36 years in the Marin County Coroner's Office. He was involved in the investigation of the Trailside Killer, a serial criminal who victimized several individuals in the Golden Gate area during the 1970s and 1980s. However, what impacted him the most were the people who took their lives at the Golden Gate. When Ken Holmes started working as a coroner, he had heard of 1 or 2 cases of this kind, but it wasn't until 1990 that he realized how frequently people were using the Golden Gate for this purpose. That year, the Coast Guard, responsible for locating people who jumped or finding their bodies, moved its base from San Francisco to Marin County in the Bay Area. This meant that when a body was found, the responsibility for investigating it would fall to Ken Holmes and the other coroners in that county. According to sources, on average, about 30 people went to the Golden Gate Bridge to take their own lives. This equates to 2 or 3 cases per month. As a coroner, Ken Holmes had to issue an annual report on the number of deaths for any reason. To optimize his work, he created a separate category of reports just for people who went to the Golden Gate due to the frequency of such incidents. According to Ken Holmes, it is believed that the actual number of cases at the Golden Gate Bridge is much higher than 1,800 because some bodies may have never been found. In 2007, he published a report on the 206 cases at the Golden Gate in the last decade. Most victims were white males aged between 14 and 44, and the most common occupation was that of student. Initially, Ken Holmes did not think the media should cover these cases, as he believed it provided an incentive for others to do the same. However, after years of seeing little change, he came to believe that limiting media coverage didn't help much. This experience motivated Ken to get involved with the Bridge Rail Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to preventing the incidents I mentioned. Ken Holmes joined the volunteer group and decided to draw public attention to the tragedies. The main goal of the foundation was to implement the steel net to deter people who went there to jump. A common argument against this steel net was that if people truly wanted to take their own lives, they would find another way to do so anywhere else. However, studies have shown a strong association between the Golden Gate Bridge and these cases, suggesting that reducing access to the bridge could significantly decrease the number of occurrences. Between 2005 and 2008, Mel Blowstein, the chief psychiatrist at St. Francis Memorial Hospital in San Francisco, treated individuals transferred to the medical center after attempting to take their own lives, including those brought in involuntarily. Mel Blowstein recalls asking 63 individuals why they chose the Golden Gate Bridge. The most common response was that it was quick and accessible. For this reason, the psychiatrist is also a strong advocate for the construction of this steel net. Other highly frequented locations, such as the Empire State Building, the Eiffel Tower, the Cathedral of Bern in Switzerland, and the Sydney Harbour Bridge, have already implemented barriers to prevent people from attempting to take their lives at these sites. Even subway stations in Europe today have some form of barriers against this. The net at the Golden Gate Bridge was designed to prevent people from jumping. In cases where someone does jump and falls into the net, trained rescue teams are ready to respond. According to a bridge official, jumping into the net is a painful experience that can cause significant bruising and broken bones. This is intended to prevent the person from getting up and then jumping into the water. Water sources indicate that there have been an average of 30 cases at the Golden Gate Bridge per year over the last 20 years. In 2012, while the net was still under construction, there were 14 confirmed cases. This means that the numbers have been reduced by more than half. In these 14 cases, individuals found a gap since the net was not yet completed along the entire bridge and jumped. According to specialists, if access to lethal means can be reduced, such cases can be prevented, and individuals may begin to seek treatment. Returning to the case of Sydney West, although the San Francisco Police Department maintains an open line for tips from anyone with information, Sydney's family prefers that people contact Scott Dudek, the private detective they hired, directly. Some people following the case believe this may hinder the investigations by the San Francisco police. As you may already know, Sydney's parents do not accept the theory that their daughter took her own life and that her body was carried away by the waters of the Golden Gate Strait. Thus, Scott Dudek, the private detective hired by the family, is pursuing a different line of investigation. Scott believes that either Sydney was kidnapped or she simply ran away and does not want to be found. We must remember that no cameras installed on the bridge captured Sydney leaving, only entering. There are also no witnesses who saw Sydney leave the location. Regarding this, Scott states that Sydney likely left the bridge in a vehicle, which is why the cameras did not capture her departure. Over time, throughout the investigation, the West family and the San Francisco Police Department received numerous tips about alleged sightings of Sydney West. All these tips have been investigated but yielded nothing. The detectives in charge of the case do not provide many details about the investigation or potential leads they may be following. The only statement given by them was that there is no evidence that Sydney was a victim of a crime. Sydney West remains missing, and her family pleads for anyone with any information regarding the case to come forward. Currently, there is a reward of $25,000 for information leading to the whereabouts of the young woman. But what about you? What do you think happened to Sydney? Did she take her own life? Was she kidnapped? Or did she simply disappear willingly to start a new life? I'll see you in the next video.